At 5:17 in the morning, calm seas south of the Caribbean turned into a silent alarm. The radar aboard the USS Gravely picked up 3 fast-moving contacts coming from the southwest, each accelerating at nearly 29 knots. Their signatures were small, agile, and unmistakably coordinated. Within seconds, thermal sensors confirmed the heat flare of diesel engines pushing to full power. The tracks carried Venezuelan flags. Inside the control room, lights shifted to red alert as the destroyer entered full readiness. Gun crews loaded shells, radar operators locked on targets, and every hatch sealed. The ship was still 14 nautical miles from the Venezuelan coast, well outside territorial waters, but the approaching craft had already cut the distance to 12 and were closing in fast. The SPY-1D radar pulsed like a heartbeat across the dark sea, marking each movement of the intruders. Above the deck, the air thickened with tension, heavy and electric. One wrong maneuver could ignite a confrontation no one wanted. Yet the order from the bridge was clear: hold position, no engagement. 3 patrol boats, closing at combat speed, ignoring warnings. Was this an innocent patrol, or a deliberate test of resolve? The tracks on radar grew sharper as the Venezuelan vessels crossed the 12 nautical mile mark. By now, every sailor aboard the USS Gravely knew what they were facing. 3 Guayquerí-class patrol boats, the pride of Venezuela's coastal fleet. Designed for speed and intimidation, each carried anti-ship missiles and a 30mm cannon capable of shredding small craft in seconds. The lead vessel broke formation, moving ahead of the other 2, cutting directly toward the destroyer's bow. Inside the Combat Information Center, operators watched the range shrink to 3.6 nautical miles. Radio warnings were transmitted on standard international frequencies, but no response came back, only static and the low hum of interference. The air was charged, almost humming with electricity. Above, the flight deck roared to life as an MH-60R Seahawk lifted into the dawn. Its sensors locked onto the patrol boats, sending real-time imagery to the command bridge. From the air, the scene looked like a chessboard drawn on the ocean. 1 U.S. destroyer standing still, while 3 smaller shapes circled closer, testing, observing. The helicopter pilot counted visible weapons, confirming that the Venezuelan crews were at battle stations, their radar antennas spinning in full rotation. Back on the Gravely, the Aegis system tracked each contact with measured precision. Electronic warfare screens displayed rising electromagnetic noise, suggesting Venezuela had activated short-range targeting radars. For a moment, the destroyer's sensors switched to passive mode, avoiding any move that could be mistaken for provocation. The bridge fell into complete silence. Every pair of eyes fixed on the range markers as the gap wavered between danger and restraint. One misplaced maneuver, one false radar ping, could trigger an exchange of fire that neither side could contain. The seconds felt stretched. The patrol boats veered slightly off the destroyer's path, but stayed close enough to remain a threat, their wake cutting sharp lines across the sea. Above them, the Seahawk maintained its orbit, its infrared camera glowing against the morning haze. This was no routine patrol. It was a deliberate test of nerve, a slow, silent confrontation where discipline mattered more than firepower. For the crew of the Gravely, the battle was already being fought, not with weapons, but with endurance and control. Hundreds of miles away, inside the United States Southern Command in Tampa, Florida, a live feed from the USS Gravely filled the main operations screen. Every movement of the Venezuelan patrol boats appeared as shifting dots over a digital map of the Caribbean. The timestamp in the corner read 0528. The situation was escalating faster than expected. Analysts confirmed the vessels belonged to the Bolivarian Navy's Guayquerí class, known for shadowing foreign ships near disputed waters. It wasn't the first time Caracas had pushed close to American patrol routes, but never this near. less than 4 nautical miles from a U.S. destroyer armed with the Aegis combat system. The event followed weeks of tension after a U.S. operation intercepted and destroyed smuggling boats off Curaçao, an action Venezuela publicly condemned as an act of aggression. At the command center, senior officers stood around a glowing table of digital overlays, territorial boundaries, radar range, missile arcs. Each layer told a different version of the same story. Venezuela was attempting to draw the U.S. into a reaction, a political move wrapped in a tactical stunt. The order from Washington remained consistent: no engagement unless under direct threat. Yet everyone knew how thin that definition could become when fast boats and radar locks were involved. On board the Gravely, sensors recorded intermittent electronic interference. The Venezuelan vessels were using short-burst radar sweeps, a signal of controlled friction, a method of intimidation without firing a shot. Through encrypted channels, data streamed back to Tampa in real time. It was now both a local standoff and an international broadcast, watched second by second from American command screens. At 5:31, the Venezuelan patrols slowed but stayed close enough to keep pressure. Their message was clear: Venezuela could contest the U.S. Navy's presence even in neutral waters. For the officers monitoring from Florida, it was a perfect example of gray zone warfare, where power is measured not in missiles launched, but in how long one side can hold steady under provocation. No one wanted the next step to be a spark. But the silence over open water was beginning to sound like one. And in Washington, as military analysts reviewed the feed, one question loomed: how long could the United States tolerate being tested before showing its strength? At 5:33, the horizon turned silver with dawn. The USS Gravely cut through calm Caribbean waters at 14 knots, its hull vibrating softly under the weight of full alert. Around it, the sea stretched like polished glass, too quiet for what the sensors were showing. 3 Guayquerí-class patrol boats of the Venezuelan Navy were moving fast on a converging course. Their wakes flared white against the blue, leaving 3 sharp scars on the surface. On radar, they looked small, but the computers knew better. Each boat displaced almost 2,000 tons and carried Exocet-class missiles with a range beyond 40 nautical miles. Their 30mm cannons could fire bursts dense enough to pierce light armor. They were designed not to destroy a destroyer, but to force one into a mistake, to make the larger ship react first. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere felt like the moment before thunder. Screens glowed in shades of blue and green. Every operator tracked a different piece of the puzzle: bearing, speed, acoustic trace, heat signature. The Aegis system stitched it all together into a 3-dimensional grid. The data scrolled without pause: bearing 238 degrees, speed 28 knots, distance 4.2 nautical miles. The numbers were precise, and every sailor knew what they meant. 1 more mile, and the situation would move from observation to threat. The Venezuelan formation split. 1 patrol boat accelerated to the destroyer's starboard side, another fell astern, and the third crossed forward at a diagonal angle. It was a textbook encirclement pattern, slow but deliberate. On the Gravely's bridge, binoculars caught flashes of sunlight bouncing off gun barrels. The enemy crews were visible now, figures in dark fatigues, standing in the open, facing the American ship without hesitation. Orders came in low voices. Engine room steady at 14 knots. Rudder 5 degrees to port to keep spacing constant. The 5-inch Mark 45 gun rotated, aligning its barrel along the waterline, a silent statement that the ship was armed and aware. The Phalanx CYWS hummed to life, its radar spinning lazily, tracking airspace within 2 kilometers. Nothing fired, nothing moved out of sequence. Discipline held the line. Above them, the MH-60R Seahawk Razor 21 orbited in a wide circle. The pilot kept altitude at 300 feet. Camera sensors angled toward the patrol boats. Through the FLIR display, heat signatures glowed bright, engines hot, radar panels powered, small groups of sailors standing near the aft mounts. One of the Venezuelan ships raised a communication antenna, Bursts of encrypted data crackled across open frequencies. Electronic warfare screens on the Gravely lit up with interference spikes. "Short pulse radar, fire control type," one technician murmured, recording the signal strength. It lasted only a second, but that second meant a lock-on attempt. Across the control deck, no one flinched. The destroyer's countermeasures stayed cold. Outside, the two vessels drew so close that the Gravely's wake merged with theirs. At 3.7 nautical miles, the situation crossed from curiosity to confrontation. The Venezuelan boats activated loudspeakers. A metallic voice, distorted by static, declared that the American ship was operating inside a restricted defense perimeter. The claim was legally meaningless under maritime law, yet tactically useful. It gave them a pretext to continue closing distance. The U.S. crew responded through international radio protocol, stating calmly that the Gravely was in international waters. The voice of the communications officer was steady, every syllable timed for the log. There was no reply, only the hum of overlapping frequencies, a deliberate electronic haze designed to jam response channels. On the open deck, sailors braced near their stations, eyes fixed on the approaching hulls. From this distance, they could read the Venezuelan emblems painted along the sides: Patrullero, 24 de Julio, General Sublet, Mariscal Sucre. Each vessel moved in rhythm, their engines rising and falling as one. The morning light turned their wakes into white ribbons, pointing directly at the destroyer's bow. At 5:34, the lead patrol boat swung across the Gravely's path, cutting a hard angle at barely 2 nautical miles. For a moment, it appeared to aim straight for collision. Inside the Combat Information Center, alarms flickered amber. Helm control adjusted speed by a fraction, keeping the destroyer steady while leaving enough space for the smaller craft to pass. The crew could feel the vibration shift under their boots as the propellers compensated. In the air, Razor 21 moved lower, its camera zooming tight. The pilot counted 8 armed personnel on the deck of the Venezuelan lead ship. No missiles were exposed, but both gun turrets were manned. The Seahawk's sensors streamed live telemetry back to the ship's data link, each frame time-stamped and archived for intelligence review. The Venezuelan boat's engines roared as it finished its crossing maneuver, throwing a plume of exhaust across the sea. Then, almost theatrically, it slowed, settling alongside the destroyer at 3.5 nautical miles. The 2 other patrol boats took positions off the stern and port flank, locking the Gravely in a loose triangle. The intent was unmistakable: surround and shadow. On the Gravely, every system that could see was watching. The SPY-1D radar continued its rotation, its frequency modulation adjusting automatically to counterjamming. The ship's electro-optical director tracked visually, zooming on the Venezuelan bridge. Within seconds, the data link fed into Washington's live feed. In Tampa, analysts could literally watch the confrontation unfold second by second. For 7 minutes, neither side moved beyond posturing. Each watched for the other to make a mistake. The destroyer's deck cameras recorded waves slapping against steel, crew members gripping rails, the faint shimmer of heat from running engines. The Venezuelans broadcast another message, shorter this time: "You are in violation of national waters." Again, the Gravely's reply was clipped, factual, unemotional. Then came a sound unlike the others, a sharp digital ping on sonar. The operator called it out instantly: "Subsurface contact, transient." Everyone froze for half a breath. Could there be a submarine nearby? The next sweep came back clean. False echo from surface turbulence. The tension didn't ease. Even false alarms felt heavy when the trigger line was so thin. Inside the bridge, the ship's commander, calm, deliberate, ordered all weapons to tracking readiness only. Safety interlocks remained engaged. His reasoning was simple: the first side to fire would lose the narrative no matter the outcome. Meanwhile, Venezuelan crews shifted positions. Some lowered binoculars, others waved briefly, as if to signal completion of their mission. But the threat lingered. Each of their ships kept fire control radar active, forcing the Gravely to maintain defensive posture. The destroyer's CIWS spun in precise arcs, matching every movement automatically. The machine's quiet mechanical rhythm became the only sound louder than the wind. At 5:35, the first hint of de-escalation appeared. The Venezuelan-led vessel throttled down to 15 knots, turning gradually eastward. Its companions mirrored the move in near-perfect synchronization. The encirclement opened like a gate. The triangle dissolved. Radar showed the range widening. 4 nautical miles, then 5, then 6. The threat was retreating. Still, protocol demanded full vigilance until contact was lost. The Gravely maintained sensor lock, engines steady, weapons hot but unfired. The Seahawk hovered for another 5 minutes, confirming the withdrawal visually. Only when the last radar trace faded below detection threshold did the order come to stand down from Condition 3. The relief was quiet, almost invisible. No cheers, no conversation, just the slow exhale of men who had stared at the edge of conflict and managed not to cross it. On paper, the report would later describe the event as a non-hostile maritime interaction. But everyone aboard knew how thin that phrasing was. As the destroyer resumed its patrol track, analysts in the onboard intelligence cell began compiling a detailed report. They labeled the incident Controlled Friction Caribbean Sector. The definition carried weight inside the Navy. It meant a deliberate attempt by an opposing force to create tension under the threshold of war, using proximity and pressure as weapons. In practical terms, it was a chess game played at sea. Venezuela's goal was to test how far it could go without provoking retaliation. America's goal was to show that its restraint was strategic, not weakness. Both achieved what they wanted, for now. Hours later, as the Gravely's sensors returned to normal surveillance patterns, the sky cleared into a brilliant blue. Dolphins surfaced near the bow, indifferent to the human drama that had just unfolded. But for the crew, the adrenaline still lingered. They knew that the incident would echo far beyond this patch of water. Within the next 12 hours, encrypted footage from Razor 21 and radar data from the destroyer were already on classified channels heading to the Pentagon. Analysts would dissect every signal, measuring Venezuela's radar strength, communication latency, and formation discipline. It wasn't merely about who came closer. It was about understanding how far Caracas was willing to go. From a tactical perspective, the standoff proved a silent truth about modern naval warfare. Dominance is often achieved not through destruction, but through endurance. To hold position under pressure, to let the enemy reveal intent first, that is victory of a different kind. By 6 a.m., Gravely's log closed the entry. No casualties, no shots fired, no violations. Yet in the Caribbean's diplomatic language, silence often speaks louder than gunfire. For Venezuela, the operation would later be framed as an assertion of maritime sovereignty. For the United States, it became evidence of professionalism, a destroyer that could operate within meters of provocation and still obey the law of the sea. The crew watched the coastline fade on the horizon. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the decks in gold. They knew that somewhere in Caracas, officials would be editing footage, crafting their narrative. And somewhere in Washington, planners were already drafting the next patrol pattern to ensure this test would never be repeated unchecked. The Gravely sailed on, her radars sweeping endlessly, her crew disciplined, her silence deliberate. The sea had returned to calm, but only on the surface. Beneath it, a new line had been drawn, invisible yet understood by both sides. And as the destroyer continued northward, every sailor aboard knew the truth that isn't written in any logbook. Sometimes, the most dangerous battles are the ones fought without firing a single round. By sunrise, the USS Gravely had returned to her standard patrol route, engines humming softly against the steady rhythm of the sea. To the outside world, nothing unusual seemed to have happened. No missiles launched, no distress calls sent, no headlines screaming of confrontation. Yet within the walls of U.S. Southern Command, the data from that brief encounter was already under review. Every radar log, every second of Seahawk footage, every fragment of intercepted transmission was being examined to understand a single question. What was Venezuela trying to prove? Intelligence officers soon reached a consensus. The close approach had not been an accident, but a carefully scripted demonstration. Caracas wanted to show that it could challenge the United States in its own backyard, to remind Washington that its coastline was not open for surveillance or intimidation. It was a political message delivered through movement, not words. For the U.S., the restraint shown by Gravely's crew became its own message. Power in that moment meant discipline. The destroyer had faced 3 armed vessels, any of which could have provoked a fatal exchange, yet the Americans stayed within their rules of engagement. They had proven that deterrence was not only about missiles and guns, but about knowing when not to use them. Within 48 hours, however, Washington's response came quietly and precisely. 2 more destroyers, the USS Roosevelt and USS Bulkley, were ordered into the Caribbean under Operation Sentinel South. A logistics ship followed, extending the fleet's endurance for weeks. Satellite coverage was expanded, and electronic surveillance intensified along the Venezuelan coast. No press release was issued, but the shift was clear. The United States had reinforced its presence without firing a single shot. Across the region, the effect was immediate. Maritime traffic adjusted course, and Venezuelan patrols began keeping a cautious distance from U.S. warships. What had started as a test of nerve had ended as a silent acknowledgement of boundaries. In diplomatic circles, the incident was referred to as a near miss in calm waters. But to the men aboard the Gravely, it was a reminder of how modern warfare often begins, not with explosions, but with silence, with vessels circling in tension and commanders choosing restraint over reaction. The Caribbean returned to its stillness, yet the message remained etched across the waves. America's strength was not only in the steel of its ships, but in the precision of its judgment. Because sometimes, the loudest warning comes from the side that never needs to pull the trigger. Subscribe to Military Power to uncover how quiet decisions like this one shape the balance of power at sea, where silence can be as decisive as war itself. See you next time.